Hey doc, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I busted my knee and I'm really not feeling very good and I don't know what to do and I just need some help. Oh, well, the only reason your knee hurts is because you're overweight, and if you lost 30 pounds, you might feel a bit better overall. Hey everybody, Lost My Ducks Season 3. How's everybody doing? I hope you're doing well. I am doing okay. Like, subscribe, notifications, all that other fun stuff. Now that that's out of the way, here we are going to talk about medical gaslighting and how it happens to the best of us. It happens to everybody. It especially happens to women, and how I was medically gaslit up until I would say about 2019 is when they finally started believing me. And yeah, let's talk about this. So, I have been medically gaslit, as I'm sure most of you have, especially if you're women. And that's no offense to men or anything like that, or saying, oh, men, it doesn't happen to men. It does happen to men. It happens to everybody. And I feel that it is lazy, incompetent doctors that couldn't be bothered to actually listen to what's going on. And it might not be lazy and incompetent, they may be overworked, because everybody is overworked and underpaid and just have lost interest. But there are some, and there is one that I know of, who is lazy and incompetent, and it has been brought to the forefront by many patients of this doctor's. I'm not going to name them for legal reasons, but it is a doctor I had, that my mom had, and my sister had as well. A little bit about my story, and maybe this will just help somebody realize it happens to a lot of us. You're not alone. Don't worry. I'm sorry it happened to you, and we will get through this, and there are ways to fight for your health and your well-being. I'm going to start this. When I was young, I was sick all the time, okay? All the time. I had croup, I had bronchitis. I had croup every single year. I had bronchitis every year, at least once a year. I was just sick a lot. I had food allergies, I had outdoor allergies. I was always getting hurt, okay? I was always bruising really easily. I remember in gym class, I think it was grade 7 or grade 8, I popped my shoulder out, my left one actually, and back then it was like 1996, I think, and they just popped it back in, and it was not a big deal. So I was always getting hurt. Always, always, always getting hurt. And having bronchitis and all that other fun stuff. So the very first big major thing that happened was it was in between grade 9 and grade 10. I believe it was in between grade 9 and grade 10. I'm pretty sure it was. So I broke my knee. So I slid my kneecap 2 inches on the left, and I partially tore my MCL. I couldn't walk. So I go to the emergency room, and back then they were kind of shitty to me. I think it was 1999 that this happened. So I go to the emergency room. I wish my mom was there, but my dad took me, and the nurse hits my knee with the thing that makes your reflexes. And I just swore at her. It hurt so bad because my kneecap was in the wrong place. And they told me the only reason it happened was because I was overweight. At the time, I was maybe 15 pounds overweight, but I was also very muscular. And I liked lifting weights. And I was like 15, and I was like, oh, this is really awesome. And I played sports, and I played hockey, and I actually coached hockey, and I coached soccer. So I was really active all the time. They're like, oh, the only reason this happened is because you're overweight. And I was like, oh, okay, so what's wrong with my knee? Oh, well, your kneecap's in the wrong place. They just took x-rays. They didn't do an ultrasound. They didn't CT it. They didn't anything. And I'm like, okay. And they ordered some physio and they're like, you have to go to your family doctor. Marley left us. So I go to my family doctor, and at the time she's like, oh, well, the only reason this happened to you is because you're overweight. And I was like, what? I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm not that big. And I'm 5'8" at this point in time. I lift weights, I play sports, I'm active, I coach. Like I'm always up and going. At the time, like, I had tried alcohol and stuff. I hadn't done any drugs or anything like that at the time. So my family physician, she won't even send me to physio. She won't send me to physio. She said I don't need it. I couldn't walk, okay? I couldn't walk. I had to use crutches, and the hospital had recommended physio, and nobody bothered to do more than an x-ray. So my kneecap goes back into place slowly because I finally get some physio because I go to the walk-in clinic and they give me physio. And I'm like, okay, sweet. I go to physio. Physio is helping. I get some exercises. They're doing the ultrasound and they're doing the TENS thing on me, and I'm going once a week. That's how bad it was. So they're trying to get my kneecap back into place, and physio's like, I think there's something else going on. Have you had an ultrasound or a CT or any other type of scan besides an x-ray? And I was like, no, they won't do it. So back then, physio wasn't allowed to order those types of things. So I never got it done. And I had knee pain ever since I was like 15 years old, 14 years old. I had my knee pain. And I'm like, oh, okay, awesome. This is going to be the rest of my life. That's what I was thinking then. And I'm like 14 years old because I was the kid that always sprained their ankle or sprained their wrist or hurt their shoulder or their hip hurt or whatever. Okay. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll just deal with it. I kept doing my physio exercises and I still do them to this day. So, and I have new physio exercises. So I kept doing my physio exercises and I kept getting really sick. So halfway through grade 10, I had to pull out of school. I had to withdraw because I was missing so much school because I had chronic tonsillitis and my bronchitis wouldn't go away. I couldn't talk. I had a fever all the time. I smelt like burped up Cheerios. That's what I smelt like because the infection was so bad. They couldn't get rid of it. So at 14 or 15, whatever you are in grade 10, I got my tonsils and my adenoids out. With my broken knee, with all this shit happening, like it was just awful, okay? It was just awful. And I'm like, okay, so I got my tonsils and my adenoids out, and I remember laying in the room and being like, why are all those little kids running around? Because the older you get, the more embedded your tonsils are, and the harder it is for them to come out. So that happened, and as I aged and as I got older, I would just get hurt all the time. And I would go to my doctor. I'd be like, what is wrong? Oh, it's because you're overweight. So I'm like, okay, let's fix the overweight thing. You know what I mean? And at the time, I was eating pretty good. I was exercising. I was lifting weights. I was playing sports. I played rugby in high school. I stopped coaching in like grade 11. So I just didn't have time anymore to coach. Oh, our co-host is back. So I stopped coaching. And I started getting into, I think I smoked pot for the first time when I was 16. And it was because everything hurt. I needed something to make everything stop hurting. So let's fast forward and I'm in a relationship with my ex, and I'm spraining my ankles all the time, rolling whatever, popping knees out, spraining wrists, spraining my hand and all my fingers, spraining my shoulders, popping ribs out, or sorry, subluxing ribs, all kinds of stuff. And I'm going to this doctor, and I had finally had enough because every single thing was, you're overweight, you're overweight, you're overweight. So I go see another doctor. And they're like, okay, you are overweight, so let's try to lose the weight. I was on a liquid diet because they thought it was something to do with my pancreas. Because my pancreas came back. I guess I had a test and it looked a little inflamed. And my liver was a little bit fatty, like slightly fatty. And this is like, I was 17, okay? And I've always had a high white blood cell count. Always, always, always had a high white blood cell count. Like, really high, okay? Ever since I was born. And then they checked my liver, and I had like mildly fatty liver, and they were like, oh, it's this and oh, it's that, and we have to get you to lose as much weight as possible as fast as we can. So I was on a liquid diet for about a month and a half. I gained weight on this liquid diet, and we're going to find out why in a little bit, okay? And the doctors are sitting there saying to me that I'm lying to them and that I didn't follow the liquid diet, and that if I'm not going to follow the diet, that they're not going to help me. And I'm like, but I've been having nothing but your boost and this gross fucking ugh. And they tried me on Ensure, and then they tried me on the diabetic one, and I was having like electrolyte drinks, and like it was brutal. Like, and I'm 18, 19 years old when this is happening. I'm like, okay. Okay. Yay. After the liquid diet and them telling me that I'm lying all the time, I stopped going to those doctors. I was like, no, no. No, no. I'm not doing this because I'm not lying to you. I'm not lying to you. I'm a teenager and I'm having liquid for dinner and liquid for breakfast. So at that point in time, I just kind of stopped eating. And yeah, I stopped eating. So I would eat enough that I didn't pass out. And I tried to get as many calories as I could to not pass out from things like Ensure or like the diabetic one. I don't remember what the diabetic one is called. I can see the label, but I just can't remember what it's called. That's where I was getting my calories, so I wouldn't pass out. So yeah, liquid diet again. I would get happy, and then I would start eating again. And I would go for dinner, and I would have some McDonald's, or I'd have some Chinese food, or I would cook at home, or this, that, and the other thing. And it was okay, and I was okay with it. And I was like, yeah, let's eat some food. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And then I would get really sad again, and then I would go back to only eating enough so I didn't pass out. So it was like this fluctuation up and down, up and down. And guess what? I didn't lose any weight. I just gained weight. And then I would like level out. And I would gain weight when I wasn't eating. And I'm like, okay, this is really weird. So it was like my body was hanging on to any calories that it could hang on to. I remember sitting in a clinic, and this is another thing that my old family doctor did that I didn't realize was so detrimental. She put me on Depo-Provera. And this is when I was like 16, because I had such bad period cramps. So I was on Depo-Provera for 9 years. And they have said for every year you're on it, it's 10 pounds you'll never get rid of. And I didn't realize how bad this was until I was in my 20s. I think I was 25. It was before I went to college. And I was sitting in a family planning clinic. And the only reason I could still go to it was because I was enrolled in college. And the woman doctor there, she's like, "Why are you on Depo-Provera?" I'm like, "Because my family physician me on it when I was like 16 because I couldn't handle the birth control pills." And she's like, "This is the worst thing you could possibly be on." And I was like, okay, because she always told me that I wasn't allowed to have an IUD because I hadn't had kids yet. And this doctor's sitting there looking at me. She's like, "Are you serious? Because you need something." So I got an IUD. She was like, "You can just get an IUD. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because I was told that unless I have kids, then they won't do it for me. She's like, "That's wrong. Your doctor was wrong." So we had to wait for at least 3 months after my last depot shot to put the IUD in. So we waited about 5 months just to be safe. That's brutal. That's the whole other situation. That was the first time that somebody actually really helped. That I wasn't, told that I'm just nuts. So I didn't lose any weight. And there's been a lot of studies that you could be stuck with that weight forever. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's 90 pounds I didn't need. Thanks, Dr. Bitch Face." Anyways, so next up of being medically gaslit brutally, I keep having issues and I have to keep going to the emergency room because I keep hurting myself. So the more I go to the emergency room, the more the emergency room catches on that you're coming to the emergency room. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Why not? Why not? Let's go to the emergency room." So we go to the emergency room, and there is one time we go, they think that my ex is abusing me. The police get involved because I go so often. And I'm like, "No, no, it's not." And there was many instances where the emergency room is like, "Oh, hey, like, I'm surprised this didn't break. I'm surprised you didn't, fracture your whatever." There was one time with a really bad ankle roll, my ankle popped out of joint and I partially tore one of my ligaments in my foot. And the ER doctor's like, "I am shocked you didn't break your ankle." He's like, I'm shocked." And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't break my ankle." "I don't know why." And he was kind of looking at me. He's like, "Huh." He's like, "That is really weird for that to happen and for you to not break your ankle." I had tripped in heels and fell down some stairs. Right? And the reason I tripped, and my heels were like little kitten heels, but the reason I tripped was because, I don't know, it would just happen. I would step weird and it would just give out. So I had to keep getting that checked. And then finally somebody was like, "We need to MRI your knee." And I'm like, "Okay, that's a good idea. Let's MRI my knee." Well, I had that happen because another walk-in clinic sent me to a sports medicine doctor. And the sports medicine doctor, this is the first time ever in my life, she looked at me and she was like, "You're double jointed everywhere." I was like, "What? What the hell's double jointed?" I had no idea. And she's like, "You're double jointed everywhere." So I'm in my mid 20s at this point in time. I'm just finding out what double jointed everywhere is. She's like, "Yeah, every single one of your joints is double jointed." She's like, "That's weird. I'm going to refer you to a hip and knee surgeon." And he got my knee MRI'd. and now he is like a big shot, like dean of hip and knee stuff, of orthotics or something like that. Orthopedics, not orthotics. Anyways, he's an orthopedic surgeon. He is great. And he MRIs my knee and he's like, has no one ever done this? I'm like, no, they haven't. And at this point in time, there was a piece that like came of cartilage that came loose and I could like push it around inside my knee. It was like my party trick. And he was like, does no one see the piece of stuff moving around in your knee? And I was like, yeah, they do. But I was literally told it was because I was overweight. He was like, that's not because you're overweight. That's your cartilage is moving around. I'm like, oh, fun. So I have knee surgery, finally. And he's like, did no one tell you that your MCL is partially torn? I'm like, no, because no one ever bothered doing anything more than an x-ray on my knee. And he's like, okay. And I remember when I woke up from the recovery room, he's standing over me. And he just looks at me. And I remember this clear as day, and I don't remember anything else. And he says to me, can you bend your knees backwards? I'm like, yes. And he just nods and walks away. Later on, and it's still like an inside joke every time I see him. And I'm like, I can still bend my knees backwards. He's like, oh, I bet you can. So every time I see him, we say something about it, and it's funny. He was one of the first people who was like, you need to get this looked into. Okay? And I was like, I thought so too. And I'm like, oh, thanks, doc. I'm glad you think it's weird too. You're the orthopedic surgeon and you think it's weird. Anyways, aside from that, so I go to weight management because I'm like, I can't lose weight. I can't lose weight. So I'm sitting there with weight management, and weight management is another doctor that has never gaslit me, and he's great. Okay? So we're sitting there, and I'm just talking about this stuff. It's like my 5th appointment with them. And I'm like, okay, I've been trying this, and I actually tried Ozempic. It made me very, very ill, and that's why people lose weight on it. I gained 8 pounds taking Ozempic. We're going to find out why. Okay. I'm sitting in weight management, and I go to stand up, and I almost fall over. And he's like, that's weird. And he noticed my knee bend backwards. He's like, sit back down. I'm like, okay. So we take my blood pressure. It is shockingly low. And then we stand up. My heart rate skyrockets. I get dizzy again. And then I sit back down, and my heart rate almost instantly goes back down. And he's like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, what do you mean that's weird? Like, excuse me, doctor, could you please explain to me why this is weird? And he's like, what other things bend weird? I'm like, this is nothing to do with me being fat. He's like, can we go through something? And I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what any of this was at this point in time. And I'm like, sure. He's like, it's called the Brighton scale. I'm like, okay. He's like, I'm going to ask you some questions and show me if you can do this. And I was like, okay. I'm perplexed. I'm puzzled. I'm annoyed a little bit. Like, I'm not going to lie. I'm sitting there for weight management, but instead I'm being asked to bend my fingers backwards, which is fine. Okay. So when you're sitting there and you're, doing the this and the this and the this and the that, I can't really do that on camera, and, touching the floor, putting your hands flat on the floor without bending your knees, and bending your knees backwards, hyperextending your elbows. I had 8 out of 9 on the Brighton scale. And he looks right at me. He's like, I think you have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm like, what? You think I have what? And he's like, I think you have EDS. He's like, I think it's the hypermobile one. I think you need to get checked for this. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what is this EDS? Like, is it gonna kill me? And he's like, no, it shouldn't. And I was like, okay, that's good. I'm okay with that. As long as it doesn't kill me, I'm fine. I will get through whatever doesn't kill me. So he writes a letter to my family physician at the time. And he's like, is anybody else ever suspected this? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure the orthopedic surgeon has. He was like, will he write a letter? I'm like, yeah, could you like contact him and like let him know? And he's like, absolutely, I will. And he's like, as for the blood pressure thing, he's like, I think you have POTS. I'm like, what the hell is POTS? It's posterior tachycardia syndrome. I'm like, okay. He thinks I have these two things. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, you're never going to hear weight management ever say this to you. He's like, I really think you need to go get a cheeseburger. I'm like, what? He's like, your blood pressure is 86/60. I'm like, oh, okay. Whatever. I'm like, I thought it was supposed to be low. He's like, not that low. I'm like, yeah, okay, fair enough. He's like, go get a cheeseburger. That could be the POTS. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He's like, I'm going to send a thing to your family physician about this. And I'm like, okay. He sent my family physician this thing, his write-up of what he thinks is going on. My family physician, who I might add is only 2 years older than I am. Not even, I think she's like 1.5 years older than I am, says to me, I don't think it's EDS because I've only had one patient with it in all my time practicing medicine, and it's a rare disorder. I'm like, okay, so let's just assume you went to medical school at 18 years old at this point in time. Medical school, and she specialized in 2 different things. So let's just say you're in medical school for 4 years, then you take a specialty for 4 years, and then you take another 2 years for this other thing that she did. I'm not getting into it because it's her business, whatever. So let's say you were in school for 10 years, so you didn't graduate till you're 28. We're both sitting here we're 32, 31. So you've been practicing medicine for 4 years? And because you've only ever had one patient with it, there's no way I could have it. I'm like, okay, send me to the geneticist. She's like, okay, fine, I will. It was almost like a pissing contest. It was so weird. So she sends me to the geneticist. It's a 2-year wait list for the geneticist, okay? So I go to the geneticist. And I'm like, okay, geneticist. And this is after I had had my mental breakdown and all that other stuff. This was 2019, and I had had my mental breakdown, and the weight management doctor, I saw him, it was like just before COVID had happened. I saw him and he had suggested this, so we got the ball rolling. So this was very recent in like medical terms, and Josie being gaslit her entire life. So this is very recent. So after that conversation with my family physician, I find out she's leaving to teach. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I have to find another family physician. So I do, and the woman I have now is amazing. I see the geneticist, and he's like, you absolutely have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. 110%. He's like, I don't know which one. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know which one? What? So he's like, you either have classic, hypermobile, or the one that starts with an A. And that's one where your hips dislocate bilaterally. So mine do that. So he says to me, the only way they're going to test you in the province I live in is if you're going to have babies, or they find a treatment that specifically works for a specific type of EDS. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. So he's like, they're all basically treated the same way. And I'm like, okay, cool. He's like, but we're also going to run some other tests on you. And I'm like, okay, other tests. So there's something called a trypace test. I think that's how it's said. I have mast cell. And I'm like, huh, what is mast cell? And he's like, oh, it's your white blood cell count's really high. You have allergies. You're like essentially in an allergic reaction all the time. I'm like, wow, that's fun. 10 points. I'm like, so this entire fucking time, they're telling me that my white blood cells and stuff is high because I'm fat is not the reason. He was like, correct. He's like, also, I tested you for fatty liver. I'm like, okay, why? He's like, you have mildly fatty liver. I'm like, I know, I have my entire life. And they just told me it was because I was fat. He's like, none of your other organs came back as having any type of issue whatsoever. I'm like, oh, okay. So what does that mean? He's like, most EDS patients, like 95% of EDS patients have a mildly fatty liver. I'm like, oh, okay. Cool. I also had my gallbladder out and stuff. That's okay, but that caused even more digestive issues, blah, blah, blah. I was gaslit for that so many fucking times. It is unbelievable that them just telling me, oh, you have irritable bowel. And then they tested me for irritable bowel, and I don't have irritable bowel, and they said I was just making it up. Apparently, I have something called gastroparesis. I'm like, okay, which is part of autonomic dysfunction. I'm like, I could have told you that. So all of this stuff, these are all metabolical things. These are all metabolic things, and it's crazy how they're all connected. The other thing that's been happening, so he tested me for a whole bunch of other stuff that they didn't have testing for back in 1985 when I was born. I had all the baby enzyme and, weird tests done minus the genetic testing because it's expensive. So I had all this testing done. I possibly have something called MCAD, which is a medium chain triglyceride dysfunction. Apparently they don't talk or... Anyways, it's a lot to explain. That's another video. I also have something wrong with my 3-MGA, which is your glutamatic acid or something like that. I'm not 100% sure what it's called. I know it's called 3-MGA. So mine is really low. And it's not supposed to be really low or really high. Really high causes, there's 3 different types of like dysfunction with it being way too high. And these are all metabolic. It being way too low is a metabolic issue as well. And they're watching it because it can not be good. And this is why I'm not losing weight. Okay? My whole life, I have just been told by doctors that I'm fat and I'm lazy and I'm not doing what they are telling me to do. But I've been fucking doing every fucking little fucking thing, excuse my language, that they have been telling me to do. I found out all this shit last month. I have been doing everything that they have been telling me to do, and it's literally in my mitochondria as to what is fucked up. So, to be medically gaslit to the point that I'm ready to fucking give up and just be a fat cow and whatever, and I'll just hurt forever. I have so many fucking things going wrong, and it could all be connected to my mitochondria. How's that? Now, if somebody would have suggested the geneticist 20 years ago, which was still a thing, I would have been able to get this testing done, and I would have found out 20 years ago, and I wouldn't have had to live my entire life in so much fucking pain and thinking I'm nuts because I can't lose weight. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? They also think I might have lipedema because I carry my weight in very lipedema areas. They're like, let's get this checked. Let's get this checked. And this isn't even begin like I was gaslit medically by like a teacher and another doctor because in grade 8 I had my very first migraine, and I remember putting my hand up in class and being like, I can't see. And then I woke up in the nurse's office. That was my very first migraine. And I was told I was crazy and I was faking it. My mom never thought I was. My mom was always on my side and always trying to help and advocating for me, and I am so grateful for that. But to have this happen my entire fucking life and not a single person up until, my late 20s, early 30s, did nobody stop to think and be like, maybe she's not lying about it? No, because it still happens, because I went to the emergency room, obvi, because like that's where I go. So I'm kidding. I went to the emergency room. I don't remember what it was for. Something. Oh, because I cut my leg open really bad, and anyways. And I told them at the time, I'm like, they think I have some really crazy shit wrong with me. And the person told me, that's a TikTok illness. So thanks, TikTok, for fucking that up. And I was like, no, it's not a TikTok illness. Thanks, TikTok. Fuck you, TikTok. Anyways, once I saw the geneticist, this was about a year before I saw the geneticist. Once I saw the geneticist, everything kind of changed. And actually, 1 month before I saw him for the first time, so the appointment is there in my healthcare record. They're like, Josie's gonna go see the doctor, the geneticist. I broke my heel. And I go to the emergency room. And at first, one of the nurses was that's a TikTok illness, okay? This is 2022. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not a TikTok illness. She's like, oh, people don't have EDS. I was like, okay. The next nurse I saw, he was great. He was like, yeah, he's like, my wife has lupus. She has connective tissue issues. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You know I'm not lying to you. And then I see the doctor. He's an older guy. And he's like, oh, you're going to see the geneticist. I was like, yeah. He's like, what do they think's going on? I'm like, they think I have EDS. And he's like, oh, I've heard of that one. He's like, I've seen a couple people with it. He's like, it's not common, but it's common enough that everybody in here should know about it. Like really loud and really like accusatory. And I was like, oh, okay. So they put me in a bigger boot than normal, and he's like, took precautions because he's like, if you have this, we have to. And I was like, oh, okay. And even when I got my gallbladder out, they were like, oh, yeah, that's like not something we usually, look at. And I'm like, could you please just, I'm seeing the geneticist in July. I got my gallbladder out in January of that year. I'm like, I'm seeing him in like less than 6 months. They really think I have this. I just need to see him to like confirm it. Okay, so the way they stitched me up, I can now stick my fingers in the holes. So that's fun. Yay! Holes in my body. Anyways, so, because they didn't believe me. But that's okay. Whatever. Shit happens. You don't have to listen to what I have to say. You're a doctor, I'm not, right? So, medically gaslit to the point that I have holes in me now that are just covered by skin. And I remember showing the geneticist that, and he looked at me, he's like, just be careful so that, you don't perforate anything. I'm like, okay, I'll be careful. He's like, who sewed you up? And I told him, and he's like, yeah, okay. He's like, he's a good surgeon, but didn't listen. I'm like, no. I also see a plastic surgeon for a skin condition. And he's actually the one I'm going to see if I have lipedema. They might do a biopsy or something. I don't know what it is. Anyways, when he stitches me up, because he has always suspected that I have some sort of stretchy skin and just weirdness, there's no scars because he's like the best plastic surgeon in Western Canada. So like, you know what I mean? He's the guy that everybody wants to go to. So I get to see him for a skin condition, and it's really great, and I don't really have scars. I think I have one that's scarred weird, but the rest of them are fine. But all the other scars I have are like weird, really smooth, and you can stick things in them, and that's okay. It's fine. It's not fine, but it'll be fine. So yeah, so that's how I was medically gaslit, and now here I am now telling you guys about it, and finally found out it's my mitochondria. That is fucking me up. Wasn't my fault. So now I've been taking these B1s. That's fun. Not really. I've been taking them with injection, and I'm on a bunch of other supplements. That's a whole other video, but I just wanted to share this with you guys. I wanted you guys to know that if it's happening to you, you're not alone. It happened to me, and it still kind of happens to me to this day. And the family physician I have now, she's wonderful, and she's like, I've only ever had a couple patients with this. She's like, do I have permission to consult the other physician in the office here, because he's been practicing medicine for about 20 years longer than I have? I'm like, yeah, of course you do. Please do. Talk to him about it. She's like, I know he's had more patients with your situation than I have. And she's like, I've had a couple, but she's like, it is actually rare. And I guess in Canada, they group it together different than they do in other countries. So in Canada, any type of connective tissue, like if you have hypermobility spectrum disorder or EDS or whichever, they group it all in the same one. So in Canada, it's only like 1 in 1,000 people or 1 in 500 people have EDS. But if you go to other countries, and depending on the subtype, it's like 1 in 10,000. And it's even rarer, that 3 MGA thing that I have. That's like 1 in a lot. Do you know what I mean? The 3 MGA issue, it's like 1 in 2 or 300,000. Like, it's rare, but hey, whatever. I'm fine. It'll be fine. Everybody's fine. We're doing okay. So, if you have ever been medically gaslit, please leave a question or a comment, or let me know what happened to you, because holy shit, what an interesting thing to have happen to me. I wish that it hadn't, because if I had been tested for this 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have hurt myself so much, and I probably would have had the tools I have now to try and make myself feel a little bit better, and maybe I wouldn't be disabled. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know it's a bit longer, but at least it's not as long as the Tale of Tanya. Da, 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 da. If anyone out there is having issues with their doctors, advocate for yourself, scream and yell from the rafters, make sure that you have somebody with you in these appointments, or record them. You're allowed to record them. Actually, there is an app in the province I live in that you're allowed to record your appointments over this app, especially like cancer appointments and stuff. You're allowed to record them in this app, and they will show you how to record them. So record your appointments, because it is your medical information and you are privy to it, whether the doctor thinks you are or not. So, anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I really hope that you guys get the help you need if you need it, and that it never happens to you if it hasn't. So, anywho, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye!